Okay, there we go. All right. Happy Thursday, everyone. This week, hooks and fragments. Fragments, not a super crazy concept. Hooks, maybe a little bit more difficult. Um, my plan this week is to just go through an example, continue to work on our shopping app, and we can talk about custom hooks, which you'll be writing for your homework. You're writing a custom hook that uses your local storage to store data on the computer where you're accessing the website and persist it even when your page refreshes. So we'll get some practice doing something very similar to that, but as applied to our demo project. And we'll talk about useEffect, which is also a super useful hook. But as usual, I do want to open up the floor for questions, concerns, anything you want to talk about before we do anything else. Okay, hearing nothing right now, plan to just jump into a sample project. And if anything comes up, feel free to unmute and jump in at any time or leave a comment in the chat. I will try and keep an eye on that. Cool. So with that, we're going to jump back into our demo project, which hopefully some of you guys have cloned already. Feel free to follow along or just watch whatever you feel most comfortable with. But you can either clone it from this link, which I will post in the Zoom, or if you already have it, all you have to do is go in and git pull on master branch. I did make one extra small commit that I think I put directly on the master branch for these styling improvements. Yeah, so this is new since last week. I did this yesterday when I was planning out this lesson. So make sure you have that commit. Cool. Then I'm going to go ahead and open my VS Code and we'll get started. So just a quick recap of where we are. Last week, we spent some time making a cart feature. So I can now add things to my cart. I can say I want to add 3 lamps. If I go down to my cart at the bottom, I now have 3 really cool lamps. And similarly, I can add some additional chairs and some backpacks. And I see those going to my cart, and I can add more backpacks. Now I have 7. So it keeps a total of all the things in our cart, which is pretty cool. But if I were to leave and come back at some point, maybe I decide that I need to go like update my payment information first, or I want to put stuff in my cart, but I have to go and talk to someone else at my house and then come back later. Anytime my page refreshes, that cart is gone. And that's really annoying. I don't want to have to go find my items again. I should explicitly, as the user, tell the website that I am done with my cart and you can get rid of all that stuff. So that way I don't have to go back and I can keep stuff and close out and come back later. Ideally, we might even make this cart persistent for your account across devices. So maybe I have my cart and I put 3 backpacks in there and I want to be able to pull up this website on my phone and have this same cart. You'd be welcome to do this. I think we might have mentioned it. I think someone had a question or a suggestion one of the previous weeks. I want to say maybe it was Charisse, that we could persist this cart like actually on our backend server somewhere. Make a table for this user has these items in their cart right now. And that way, when someone else logs in to the website on a different device, you can pull whatever that cart is and start them from that location. So certainly we could do that. We're going to stick to just on your computer for today. So I should be able to close my browser and come back in or refresh my browser, and I should have the exact same cart as before I did those things. And while we're at it, we'll also maybe like add a button down here to take stuff out of your cart. If we're going to persist our cart, we need some way to actually clear it out. So we'll do that as well. Questions, comments, concerns before we get started? Okay, hearing nothing. Let's go for it. Okay. That was a sneak peek accidentally of what we're about to do. Um, you may remember that last week we added to our product table. We have the search bar up here, and we have a product listing. And inside of our product listing, we actually show what the item is. And then we have this new widget called a quantity selector here, which contains all of this here, where we can input a new number, how many of each thing we want, and we can add it to our cart. And that is hooked up to a function which we pass through a property, this add quantity to product. And it gets passed through the table, through the product listing, but it actually originates from this app.jsx here. And this is where our state lives. So we have our cart in app.jsx, and we have this function. I think we explicitly said we do not want to just give access to this set cart function to every component, because not every component needs it. And they shouldn't be able to do whatever they want with the cart. They should be able to do specific actions to the cart. In this case, our quantity selector only needs to be able to add or subtract a quantity from the cart. It doesn't need to be able to like completely delete the cart or do a bunch of crazy stuff. And so we created a function that sort of restricts the access to this cart. And then we pass this function instead to this table here. We have our cart display, and we pass just the items in the cart so that the cart display doesn't have any access to actually change the things. But that needs to change, because eventually we're going to have to be able to remove stuff from inside the cart here. But number one thing we need to do right now is we need a way to save and persist this state across renders. And the way we can do that is we can actually save it to the local storage in your browser. So your browser has storage. If you go into inspect element and then storage, I think those of you on Chrome will have something very similar. I don't know if it's exactly called storage. And then you'll have this local storage section over here. And local storage says for each website, I am going to store a bunch of key value pairs. This is a string that maps to another string, and I can say get my local storage item called token, and it will give me whatever is stored in this local storage. You might notice from testing earlier that we actually have this cart stored as a string. Down here, it's trying to parse out that string for us just so we can actually see what the value is. But it is, in fact, a string, and this is what we actually need to store. I just didn't clear this out from when I was testing it earlier. So the way we can do that is we can use our local storage API that is provided just natively through Node.js. So if I just type local storage, you'll see that this is a defined feature of Node that just interacts with the local storage on your browser. And local storage has 4 different methods with which to interact. I can either get an item where I pass it the key of the item I want and I get back a string, or null if that key doesn't exist in local storage. So if I try and get cart, but there is no cart in my local storage, it'll give me null instead. Similarly, I have set item. So I can say in my local storage, set a new value for this key, and I give it the string of the key and the value. This does not return anything because it just works. There's no reason for us to get a value back. We have a remove item, which is to say, get rid of that key specifically. So this sets a new value. This just completely gets rid of it. And then we have clear, which is clear everything out. Very rarely, I feel like, would you really want to do this? You probably are interested in mostly just getting and setting items and maybe removing them in some rare cases, but clearing the whole set of everything feels a little bit more difficult to find a good use for. Okay, so with that said, if I wanted to save my cart as local storage, what I would do is I would do local storage dot set item, and then I give it a key. You can name this whatever you want. I'm going to call this cart, and I have to give it a string. I cannot give it this cart, which is an array of my products. I have to give it a string. And so what we will typically use is the built-in JSON library for JavaScript that allows you to turn anything into a JSON string. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. We've already been using it a very long time. Anytime you create an object in JavaScript in line, it's a JavaScript object. My object key equals value, foo equals bar. I can create objects inside of my objects, other object true. I can make it an array, something on there. Ooh, bar. This is a JavaScript object, and this is basically exactly how JSON looks. It just takes whatever structure you have and puts it into the format of a JavaScript object. So it's a bunch of key value pairs. And the value is whatever valid data type there is in JavaScript. So it could be a string, could be a number, could be an object, could be an array, anything like that. So this is generally the way that we would serialize and deserialize data when sending it across the web. And what we mean by serialize and deserialize is how do we put it into a common format that's understood by multiple parties. So if I'm sending data to like from my front end and I'm sending it to my back end, I need some common format that both of them can recognize and then interact with. In the end, when that data is actually being passed through the air, through the internet, that is actually just a bunch of bits, zeros and ones, since that's what we can actually represent in the physical world. But in order to get into that state, what we do is we say we have a JavaScript object notation, a JSON format. We're convert that into a bunch of bits and bytes, send that across space and time, and then our other side is going to deserialize that and turn it back into JavaScript. Our serializer and deserializer specifically know how to convert a JavaScript object into bits and bytes and how to convert those bits and bytes back into a JavaScript object. Both of them are assuming that it's a JavaScript object. In theory, we could have a serializer and a deserializer for any format. I could have some random JavaScript class, some class. I have a constructor that does something, and maybe I have some methods and whatever. This is not necessarily JSON format. This is a complex object, but I could write my own code that turns this into bits and bytes and turns bits and bytes back into this class. But that's annoying and terrible and really hard. And so we usually just use the built-in libraries that do this for us. And on the internet, it is overwhelmingly JavaScript. Sometimes you'll see XML as a format that's used, especially historically. But in this day and age, we almost always use JSON. Did that make sense? Was that a clear explanation? Any questions that arose before we start using it? Okay. I'm assuming by the silence that it relatively makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, please speak up. Anyway, there is a JSON library, and we can call JSON.stringify, which turns whatever I have, whatever object, array, number, complex JavaScript object into a JSON string. So I can JSON.stringify my cart. Actually, let's prove that this works and do this. JSON cart is equal to JSON.stringify cart. And then our local storage, we will set our JSON cart, which is a string, to be whatever is in cart. We'll console.log this just to actually see this pop up in our console. So now if I'm using this site and I add some stuff to my cart, I go into my console, we're going to see this string, which is a JavaScript object. It is, in this case, it's actually an array rather than an object, which is still valid JSON, and it's an array of objects, and the objects are our products with their quantity attached. And I have 2 of them right now. This one has a quantity of 4, this one has a quantity of 3. If I go into my storage, we'll see in our local storage that this is our cart. And there's 2 items in here. And if I then go and add some more stuff, we'll see that it actually updates. And now my quantity is 15 down here. So when this component re-renders, it's setting whatever's in my cart to local storage. And what I need to do is I need to actually load up this JSON into my cart. So I have my state here. Rather than this default, which is an empty array, what I want to use as the default is whatever's in local storage. So this is constantly being updated every time my cart changes and this app re-renders. I can do the reverse of this. I can take this JSON string, which is in local storage, and I can JSON.parse it. And you'll notice that this takes in my text that I want to parse and some optional receiver function, reviver, sorry, which is like a way that you can influence the parsing operation and like parse it into a different type or do some more complicated stuff. I don't think I've ever used this reviver parameter myself personally. But what it gives you back is the actual thing that you parsed. My JSON cart is what I get back. Or rather, if I wanted to use this as my default, I would JSON.parse my JSON cart, which is not a valid variable right here. And so instead, what I need to do is local storage dot get item. And we'll call this cart as well. One thing that is just an interesting thing to think about is that sometimes when you use a key multiple times throughout your code or like a number that indicates a specific value that is meaningful, it can be a good idea to declare a constant for that thing instead. So maybe I declare a constant called my cart key. And then instead of hard coding the word cart in here, I just throw in my cart key, which I think actually the convention in most languages for constants is uppercase, or snake case rather, with this underscore. But what this does is it does 2 things. Number one, if I wanted to change this in the future, I don't have to change it in several different places. And I don't have to like Control F to figure out, okay, where did I actually like write this key that I'm using? And number 2, it just gives some extra information to the reader about like, what is this thing? This is a key for storing my cart data. Maybe I have other keys. Maybe I have user key and stuff like that. Token key. In this case, it's not adding a whole lot of extra like information for us. We're using it mostly just so that we only have to change it one place if we want to. But especially for something like a magic number where maybe I have like this really complicated function and this returns input times 60 times 60 times 24. These numbers feel kind of arbitrary because I don't really know like what they represent. I could instead make a constant that adds some extra information about what this constant actually represents. Seconds in minute, minutes in second. Oh, that doesn't make sense. In hour, hours in day. Or actually, even better than this, maybe I would just calculate this by hand and say 60 times 60 is 3,600 times 24. 86,400. This number is even more magical. If you looked at this number, no one would really have any idea what this actually represents, but it's the number of seconds in a day. And now I could just multiply this by seconds a day. And I can now tell that this is saying my input is some number of seconds. Maybe I would divide this rather than multiply. And now we're trying to figure out how many days is this number of seconds.
Would you use that to put a time limit on your shopping cart like Amazon does, and then they dump it out after a
Yeah,
couple hours?
you could do that if you wanted to. Any number of reasons. This is just a very general example of a reason why you might want to put like a constant somewhere else and put a name over it, especially for magic numbers. I get code reviews all the time where like I put a magic number in there and people are like, what does this number mean? Put it behind a constant, something like that. Just something to think about. And certainly in this case, you could use it for a number of reasons, including what you just mentioned. Okay, back to the topic at hand. So we have this local storage.get item where we get a key, but you remember that this is string or null. Um, let's see what happens if I go into my website and I have my local storage and my cart is null. I'm getting a bunch of console errors and my page is completely broken. Cart is null. Cart display 16. Okay, so this cart dot length is equal to 0. Why is my cart null? I never set it to null. I said it to be an empty string. Well, if my cart starts empty, then what's going to happen is it's going to get item, it's going to see that there's nothing there, or it's an empty string, and it's going to try and JSON parse that into a JavaScript type, and the type that it produces is null. There's nothing there. And so that's bad. So if my get item returns null, indicating there's nothing there, what I want to do instead is say, well, I actually just want to use an empty array, since that's what the default of the set cart was previously. And we're going to make it a string because get item has to return the stringified version of whatever my JavaScript data type is. And then parse turns this back into the JavaScript data type. So it will take this and parse it back into an array. If I did this, then we're going to have a problem, a different kind of problem. Now it's going to, it should tell me that it can't parse this array, but I think it's still hung up on the other error. Anyway, this should be a string. All right, let's clear out this cart and make sure it works. All right, sweet deal. So we start with nothing. I can add stuff to my cart. Now I have 3 things in my cart. I can add 2 things to my cart. I have 5 things. The stringified version looks good. If I go into my local storage, we'll see that this cart has a parsed value, which has 2 different items. They have the right quantities. If I refresh my page, it'll show me I have 3 things, I have 2 things, which is cool. So that basically works. That's all the stuff we want. Now our data is being persisted in local storage, and every time we change that cart and our app.jsx re-renders, it's going to show this cart again. So that's great. We have our cart that persists. That's basically what we wanted. That does everything we need. Let's see if we can do something else. So I have my cart. My cart is in my app.jsx. Let's say that I have multiple different pages on my website, and I want to be able to reuse this cart on multiple different pages. This cart is a piece of state, and it has its own functions associated with the state that we then pass around. Because it's a piece of state, it's not something that we can necessarily just pull out of a component and like put in a different function and like in a utilities folder or something like that. But we do need some way for other pages on our site to be able to reuse this state data and additionally some properties of that state. So these functions we declared that interact with it, just other interesting things like that. So if we want to reuse something like this across our website in different places, what we would typically do is we would take this and put it into a custom hook. So we've already used the useState hook from React. That's the one we know. There are many others. One of the things that I linked in the agenda this week is these built-in React hooks. There are a lot of them. You might be interested in going to look at some others. We're going to talk about useEffect today. I want to say maybe use callback is discussed maybe halfway through this course. And I think that's it. There are other ones. They are not nearly as useful. They're much more niche, but they are all still valuable in some way. But we can declare our own hooks that expose some piece of state and how to interact with it. And then we can reuse those hooks across different components to provide the same functionality across multiple different locations. So what I'm going to do for this demo is I'm going to create a hooks folder here. And we'll call this hook use cart.jsx. We're going to declare our own hook, which is a function. And the convention is to put use in front, like use state and use effect. We're going to call this use cart. And
I
this,
have a question.
go ahead.
Uh, why do you call it hooks? Because technically it's a function that's reusable.
Everything in React is a function. A component is a function. A class component is not a function. Um, the reason why it's called a hook, that's a React terminology. And I believe the quote from the React website is that hooks allow you to quote unquote hook into life cycle events of a component. We haven't really talked about class components at all. That also comes later in the course. But historically, in previous versions of React, how we would create a component is we would declare a JavaScript class called myComponent. And then this would extend React component. And then we would have a constructor. And in here, we would set our state to be whatever initial value we wanted. And I think this is the signature. No, I think it just wants an object here, maybe. This dots. My syntax on class components is very rusty. Oh, I think it's because I'm missing that. My component constructor super. It's a bunch of just class boilerplate here. All right, this looks better. So we have set state, and the input is a callback that sets our state. So when I have my function, I have useState in a class component, it's just an object that has all the different state properties we want. So I could set my state to be foo, bar, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of other things that are very similar to what you would see in a React class component. And with that, I just don't remember the syntax here. I'm going to give up. Different ways of interacting with a component. So my state I do through a like an object like this, but you can also call methods just before I forget. When we have a functional component and we normally return out of the function all that data that we want, in a class component, we call this render function, which returns whatever data we're interested in. So this would be like where I return my div and my paragraph and stuff. And we have functions that are called at specific lifecycle events of a component. So mount component did mount is a function that is called by React immediately after a component is mounted. Mounted meaning it's inserted into the document for the first time. So essentially what I want is if my component is being loaded for the first time, everything that I want to do has to happen inside of this component. And I can do the same thing where I set my state, my I think I have like my previous state. Anyway, I can set state in here and trigger a re-render, which calls this function again. I can do whatever I want. I can console.log some stuff, yada, yada, yada. So this is a lifecycle event. It happens when the component mounts onto the page. There are many other ones. So this is another one, get snapshot before update, after. I don't remember what all of them are off the top of my head, but these are functions that are defined for this React component type. And with a functional component, we need ways to, even though we're just calling a function that returns a bunch of HTML elements that need to be rendered to the page, we need some way to tell React behind the scenes to interact with the component in the ways that we can do with these lifecycle functions. So what is the equivalent for do something after the component mounts for the first time? Well, the equivalent is useEffect, which is a React hook. It allows you to hook into the event where some piece of state, or in the case of an empty array at the end here, when my component is first mounted to the page for the first time. And when those things happen, we run some side effect, console.log hello. These are functionally equivalent. Oh no. What did I do? These are equivalent things. So if this was my component, and then I had my return here, if paragraph is, these components are exactly the same. They do the exact same thing. So these hooks allow us to sort of do all the same things we could do with class components, but in different ways. And state is how we control when is my component actually going to re-render. We have state in class component. We just handle it differently through an object instead of through these functions that we call that return a piece of state to us and allow us to modify it, but that state lives behind the scenes in React. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, that was not convincing. Um, but there is lots of good reading that I would definitely recommend going to the React website on this. Um, it'll give a good idea of like what these hooks are for, and the overall justification is somewhere on here, although I don't know if you're going to get a good high level thing on this website. Maybe that would be better to do from a blog of some kind. Okay, let's get back to it really quick. So we have our custom hook, and we have our cart stuff here, which I think probably fell off my clipboard. Oh no. I hope I can get it back. That would be so sad if I couldn't. Oh, thank goodness. All right. So what we do with the hook is we declare a piece of state that is going to be unique to the component that uses this hook. So I can call use cart in my cart display and inside of my table, but the actual state that those hooks are using is going to be different. So we have a different cart for the table and a different cart for the cart display. They will work the same way, but at any moment in time, they may have different values because we interact with them differently. But they expose the same functionality. They work the same way. They're just two different pieces of state. So that's very important to know. If you want your cart to be shared between multiple components, well, then you need to declare that state once and pass it down to those components as properties, which is what we were doing previously. So we have our use cart here. We have our piece of state that is unique to whoever is calling use cart. We have our JSON.parse. We're going to move that cart key over here since it does not need to be part of our app anymore. This data belongs to this cart, and so we're going to keep it nearby. We're going to keep this JSON.parse since it's very reasonable. And we're going to do this JSON cart here. And what we're going to do instead of every time this use cart is called, this does work, but traditionally what we want to do is specify both for our own brain and also for React so that we don't get any weird edge cases, that we only want to save our cart to local storage if it changes. So if my app.jsx re-renders and it calls use cart again, which again is just a function, it's going to execute it from top to bottom. I don't always want to save whatever's in my cart because it might be the exact same thing, in which case we're just wasting computational power. In this case, it's negligible. It doesn't really matter. But for something more expensive, we really do want to be careful that we're not doing it more often than we need to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify a useEffect hook, which has two parameters. This useEffect has an effect callback, which it's not going to tell you what that type is, but it's essentially just a function that returns nothing and just executes. It just does some stuff. It does a side effect. When we say side effect, we mean some code that's executing that executes as a result of something else happening, but is unrelated. And how we specify when this side effect is going to run is we give it a dependency array to say, I want you to run when certain pieces of state change. So my dependencies is a set of values where if those values are different than the last time this use effect was run, and it's going to run every time something that calls this use cart re-renders, only if those variables change do we actually want this effect to run. And so we typically use this with state because state is going to be the same across different re-renders unless you manually update that state using this set cart. If I were to declare a constant in here, this is actually going to be a different object every single time useCart renders because it's creating a new object. It's not something that we're saving between renders. This is just a function that creates an object in this variable, and it's going to be different every time. And so if I put some const in here, this doesn't do anything because some const will always be different every time this reruns. So usually we just want to use state in here because state is literally the same object. That's what state is. It persists the exact data, the exact object or array between re-renders. And so if my cart data has changed, then I want to save it to local storage. We only need to do that if my cart is different than it was previously. If it's not any different, then it doesn't matter and we don't need to save it. So let's console.log saving new cart and our JSON cart. Cool. And last thing we need to do is we need to say when someone calls this use cart, what are we going to give them back? And so we need to specify a return value for this hook. And hooks will traditionally return either an object or an array of things, depending on what you want. Most commonly, I see it as an object. And what you're returning is all of the things that a user of this hook is able to do. So I want them to be able to get whatever their cart is. So again, if app calls use cart, it's going to have its own state compared to if table calls use cart. And so in either case, I want to give it whatever its current state is for the cart. And I also want to expose this function that we wrote that allows them to operate on that. So this is a cart with two, this is an object with two different properties. And back in my app.jsx, now I can use this hook that I defined instead of my use state. Cart. Remember, this is an object, so we need to object destructure these properties rather than array destructure. Use state specifically returns an array of two objects, but we said we're going to return it in object form. So I get my cart, I get my function by name, use cart. Import that. All right. I would expect that this is functionally equivalent to what we have right now. Everything looks good. So we have our hook. And if I go back in here, oh, I don't have it running. Let's run this again. Let's see what's going on. Cool. So we have our cart, which has 3 and 6. And then I want to add to that cart. I have my 3 and 11 down here. And let's say that I have a different page that has a different cart. So maybe in my there's not really a good way of doing this. Let's just throw it in some other random component. It's not in a different page. This is not really where I would want to put it, but we don't have like different pages set up in our app yet. That also comes later in the course when we start talking about routing. But let's just randomly go into our product table and let's call use cart again. So now if I console.log table cart, my cart, I add quantity to product, This is telling me that I've already declared this constant, so I'm actually just going to get rid of this since it is a property that we passed in and is valid. If I print out my table cart, so here's what's going to happen. I go into my console. Oh, this is very large. Let's clear out our cart really quick. Delete all. Okay, we have nothing in our cart. We have our table cart, which is an empty array. We have use cart. Let's improve this message really quick. Just so that they look the same. Cool. So we have our app.jsx cart. We have our table cart. They are both empty arrays. If I add here, you'll notice that it gets added to my app.jsx cart. We now have an object with a quantity of 7, but our table cart is exactly the same. Because again, when we call that hook, it's a different piece of state for each user of the hook. So we can reuse the state and related functions in different places on our site. Maybe we have a page for searching for products, and we have a cart specifically for that. And we have a separate page for maybe like buying services or like something non-physical. And we want to have a cart for those items, but those items are different. Or again, going back to the Amazon example, maybe I have my Amazon website and I have a cart for my like goods that I'm buying from the actual Amazon website. So like a TV or a pen. But I separately have other Amazon sites like uh whatever, Amazon Fresh, where I can order groceries. Those groceries might be in a different cart because they're not really related to my other stuff and they get handled so totally differently. But the cart functions exactly the same. It's just different items that are in there and they get treated differently by the HelloFresh, not HelloFresh. I'm not advertising any services here. Amazon Fresh and regular Amazon. The logic that interacts with the cart is different. But that functionality is still the same, so we might put it behind a hook so we can use it in multiple different places. Is that clear about why we might use a custom hook and how it works?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I
Yes.
can hear you.
Um, I'm just wondering, like, so these custom hooks are sort of added on to like a parent component is like sort of just adjusted based on a specific need, right? Or am I not following
Yes,
properly?
your hook is like a specific functionality that you want, a piece of state and related functions to that, that you could throw directly into a component as a piece of state and functions, but that's not reusable because then you have to declare in other components. So it is functionality that is attached to, in the case of a custom hook, multiple components, or if it was just one component, you wouldn't need to do this. You could just throw it in there directly.
Okay, gotcha.
Other questions? All right. I want to do maybe like one other super quick change, and then um, the other thing that's worth mentioning that we kind of briefly touched on is I can have a use effect that depends on nothing. So again, this dependency array at the end is all the pieces of state that need to change in order for this effect to run, just totally unrelated code to the actual thing that's changing. It's just a product of that thing changing. Um, I can console.log here and say empty array effect. And if we do this, which again, I'm going to go and clear out my local storage because it's getting unruly. Actually, let's go clear out that logging, which we don't need anymore since we're pretty sure that it works. And this cart is useless. Cool. That should clear out our console a little bit. Cool. So we are saving our cart and we are calling this empty array effect when the page loads. I can do all kinds of stuff with this page, and you'll notice that it never gets printed again until I refresh my page, and now it gets printed again. So an empty dependency array indicates that I want this effect to run when my component first loads into the page, and that's it. The reason why it's actually printing twice is because of this thing that we have in our main.jsx, the strict mode, which renders everything twice to try and help you in development identify when you have bugs in your state and your rendering code. So it is rendering it twice, but in production, it would only ever run this effect one time. So that is the thing that can be useful to you. We don't have a use for it in this particular demo, but we may in the future. The other thing I wanted to do is I want to go into our cart display and add a little button at the end of this list item so that we can remove an item from our cart. So let's create a button here. This will be clear, so clear out this item from our cart. I'm gonna add a style and maybe just give it a margin left of like 10 pixels, since I think that it will look fairly nice. Yeah, it looks decent. So when I click on this, it currently does nothing, but I want this to remove my item from the cart. So let's go do that. This is a functionality of our cart, and so it makes sense to declare a new function like this add quantity to product. Clear product. And we're going to clear this using the ID of the product, just to be explicit about what this is. So this should be a number, and we'll search through our cart to figure out where that is, and then we'll just take it out. I think the easiest way to do this is to use the filter function. So if I do cart.filter, it doesn't actually know that this is an empty array because we didn't give it an empty array as the default, but I know that it's an array type and the array has a filter function. And what filter lets us do is run a callback function on every single item in the array. And we can do a bunch of stuff in here, but if we return true, then that item is kept. And if we return false, then that item is removed. And it doesn't do it in place, so it's not actually modifying this cart state. It's instead creating a new array that it's going to return to us. This array type that's getting returned, it says never because it doesn't know what type the array is. But it's returning a new array with only the items that return true. So what I can do is I can filter out anything that doesn't match this, that matches this product ID and get rid of it. There should only ever be one. So I can say return item dot product dot ID is equal to my product ID. Remember that our cart is not of these objects here that have an ID. It's of product with quantity objects where we have a product, and this is the product type that we define up here, and a quantity, which is an integer. So if I want to get the ID of this product, I would access the item that we're currently looking at, dot product dot ID, which is what we've done down here. And we match it up with this product ID. So this filters so that it keeps, we gotta do not equals here to say return true if it's not a matching ID, which keeps it around. And if it is a matching ID, that's the thing we want to clear and get rid of it. New cart is equal to my cart.filter, set cart, new cart. And so this is an array. We stick that back into our array state. And our useEffect will notice that cart has changed and save it into local storage, just like we expect. All right, and so this is a function that I want someone to be able to use for the cart. And so we're going to also include this in our object of things that we pass out. And then when we use that cart, we can clear a product by ID. What needs to be able to do that? Well, the cart display needs to be able to do that. So I'm going to pass it as a property so that it can call that function. And if we go in here, let's add an on click to this button. So this is an event handler. When this button is clicked, we're going to do something, and we're going to call that property. What is the ID? Well, in here, we're mapping each item into a list item, each product. And so we can get this product with quantity. And again, it's not a product item. It's this type that we declared. So we're going to do product with quantity dot product ID and pass that ID that we expect in this function. So let's see if this works. I have my cart. I can add things to my cart. I can clear this really cool chair, and it's gone. If I refresh, it's still gone. If I go into my storage, to my local storage, and I click on this cart, we have our objects, we have the lamp, and we have the backpack, but we do not have a third item for that chair that we got rid of. Now I can get rid of my backpack, and I only have one item, which is my lamp. I can get rid of that, and now I have nothing in my cart. And that's it. We have our fully functional cart. It persists in local storage. When I refresh, I can close my browser and go back in. And my cart is still there. I can clear stuff out. I can add more stuff. It's all good. And we only went 1 minute over time, which is improvement for me. All right. I will stick around as usual, a couple minutes for questions if there are any. Please make sure to fill out the sign-in form before you head out. But if there's no questions, then feel free to jump off. I will see you guys next week. Have a good weekend. Have a good Thursday night.
Hey, if I could ask, this shopping cart app example doesn't seem to be the same one in the terms of the to-do list that I'm doing in React. Is this just to get the idea of the what we're learning about down and not necessarily do the same assignment, or are you guys doing shopping app assignment in React class?
No, this is not part of the class. What I think is valuable, and feel free to tell me that it's not valuable,
Mhm.
is having a separate example where we can really talk about like the reasoning behind why we want to do these certain things that we're doing for the to-do list app, but not something that's so different that it like is we're learning totally different things. I think some of the feedback that I've gotten is that it would be helpful to go through the homeworks so that like people actually understand why uh, the assignments are saying, okay, we're going to use local storage here. Some of it is explained in the assignment description, but
Mhm.
a lot of feedback that I've seen is that like I don't understand. It feels like magic that we're just throwing this in here and we're just doing it for the sake of it. Like, why do I need to do this? And also building some intuition so that when you come across a similar problem in the future, you know, oh, I need to use a use effect hook in order to do this. Whereas if you're just sort of like copying code off of the instructions, then there's no intuition being built. So the goal of this is like do something similar where we can
Uh-huh.
do the same things that are being applied to the homework assignment without literally doing your homework assignments for you guys, because I don't think the mentors would appreciate that.
No, no. But what I'm trying to get at is with to get into the class, we had to do a API assignment, right? Like I did like a Marvel comic assignment from the API, and it was like this broad homework. Whereas with the homework we're doing week to week, which is fine, it's just like very like sort of you have to do it this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. And sometimes I have an idea of what I want to do, but like the directions are focused on one way of doing it.
Yes.
Um, and I'm not sure. I don't know. Like if you told me to do a shopping app, I would like probably, look up a lot of these things on the React Dev website and then try to work it from there.
Well, some of the things are the same. Like
Uh,
for the homework, you're going to use local storage. So if you wrote down and took notes and put local storage dot get item parentheses, you have
mhm,
like one line of code for your homework. So,
got you.
but yeah, the variables are all different because I think like for the use state, we have to-do list, comma, set to-do list with the square brackets.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It should look very similar when you then get to whatever week of homework we're doing. And I agree with you. It is very different than the assignment that was given to get into the class. I've never done that assignment. I don't really know anything about it. I've just seen it referenced every once in a while. So that's news to me about like what you guys are actually working on. The homeworks in these classes are generally pretty rigid. Once you get towards the end and we get into like CSS stylings and like the review weeks, that's sort of like where the creativity can start to come into things. But the homework itself is like, we have this functionality we want to build, add this feature. And my opinion is that it doesn't always do a great enough job of explaining like, okay, what is this feature? Why do we want to add it? And like what are the intricacies? And that's something that I feel like as mentors we can help with a lot more than just going through the assignments. I don't know
Got
if
you.
that really answered your question or if there
No,
was
no, you did, you did. I don't mean to like be a judgmental or anything. I was
no,
just
no, no. I
wondering like
didn't
why
take it as such.
because like I was just wondering like when I logged in, like I haven't been part of your class yet. I was at the other guys. So I was just looking, I was like, okay, this is interesting. I'm just wondering if a different section of the class is doing something differently, I guess.
No, no, no. This is just something that I'm doing in my group sessions, but it's completely independent. You don't have to
Got
do
you.
any of this. It's just supplemental.
Got you.
Just a way of
And,
focusing these sessions. Go ahead.
and are you guys gonna do the routes, like the concept of routing, like React Router in this app as well, or you guys already doing that?
Um, we will. It's a future week. I don't remember how far into the future it is. This is not the
Mhm.
right class. I think it comes up like after
Oh,
the
okay. Yeah, I got you.
week, so it'll be sometime in January that we
Got
actually,
you.
which is partially why I didn't want to do that here. Like if we had multiple different pages, we could say, oh, let's create a hook for this page and this other page that sells different products. But
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was thinking you were gonna do
jumping
with the
ahead,
hooks going into the shopping app. Like you have router
yeah.
within, and then clicking different
Trying to keep
web.
it pretty focused on like here's the stuff that you need to know for this week's homework rather than
Got
jumping
you.
ahead. There's a bunch of things that I would personally love to jump ahead and do. Um, I think TypeScript is really cool. I don't think it should wait until week 18. I feel like it'd be great if people just like knew what it was earlier and could use it for the rest of their assignment if they want to, or certain React features that would just sort of help us make like an app that actually makes sense rather than we're gonna like do this thing that like kind of makes sense, but in the real world we wouldn't do it this way. And I'm gonna give you this disclaimer in advance that we would do it a different way in the future, or we're gonna come back to it and do it a different way in the future. Um, I think in another week, maybe one of the review weeks, I'm thinking maybe we'll turn this cart into a context and talk about the use context hook, which is just like another way that we can pass data between a bunch of different components, but we don't have to like manually pass it as a prop down like 7 layers of components. So there's a lot of value in there, and it looks also very similar to a custom hook like this. But I want to keep things focused for now. So yeah, I would love to talk about React Router. I'll probably save that for a later week though. Great questions though. Anyone else while we're here?
This is kind of adjacent, but
Okay.
I was wondering, do you have any feelings? I was wondering, I want to start publishing some of my projects. So I was in between Vercel and GitHub Pages. Do you have any thoughts?
GitHub Pages is great and it's pretty easy to do. You can only create one thing and that's it. You get one free GitHub page. After that, you have to pay for it. So
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna use the other one then.
yeah, I have a GitHub page app, which is just like my portfolio website, which is probably not going to change. But if you're planning on doing multiple things, then you're definitely going to have to find some other different provider. For the most part, at the scale that we're probably doing things right now, you could honestly get like a free service basically anywhere. I think you could like go to Google Cloud and probably, have enough credits to be able to host whatever you want. I've done this before. There's a concept called a hackathon where you like spend the weekend from Friday through Sunday just working on a project. I did a couple of them during college, since I was part of a club. And during a hackathon, like you just need to be able to host some app that you make for like 2 days and maybe a little bit beyond if you really like it. And so like I'll go to Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure and do whatever. So anything will work at the scale that we want, but certainly there are some things that will have free tiers and some that aren't. So keep an eye out. I think people also use Netlify. That's a one that I've seen fairly often, so it might be worth looking into as well. Yeah, Firebase could also be a good option. I think the Google Cloud stuff is generally really easy to use, and they have really great documentation on it. Um, so, Firebase is pretty cool. Uh, there's lots of other really awesome Google products. Some of the other like cool supplemental stuff that I'd love to talk about sometime that's like totally unrelated to the curriculum, maybe during a review week or at the end, is just like stuff that will be useful in like a professional setting, like Docker containers, which are pretty cool. Um, and I know like one way of running your applications in a like an environment that is easy to set up. Sometimes if you're running an application in a cloud provider, it can be real difficult to get it to be the same environment as your computer. And if it's not the same environment, then maybe it'll just crash spectacularly. And so you can run it in a Docker container, which is literally like a small little package of an operating system that has all the exact dependencies that you want. And you can run that container on any machine that runs Docker containers, and it will run the exact same way. And that's really cool. That's really powerful. We use Docker containers literally all the time at work. And you can do stuff like that really easily on Google Cloud. That's something I use very often. So that might also be something worth talking about in the future in more depth, but also worth some personal research if you're interested. Do you know which one I can have multiple pages? I don't want to use something that will only give me one free page and one project. Literally any of them, you can create multiple different projects. If you're thinking about like different pages of the same project, then maybe you start thinking about like React Router. And like we have one React project that has multiple different pages that you can navigate to in your URL bar. But if you have multiple different projects that need to be hosted, then like any cloud provider will be able to do that for you. You just got to find one that has a free tier.
No, thanks for telling me about GitHub Pages. Like, I don't want to use GitHub Pages if they're only going to allow me one free project. So that's why I was asking. So now I won't use that. Have
All
you
right.
tried Vercel?
I have not personally.
Mm.
No comments.
Okay, well, I'll take a look. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions while we're still here? All right. I'm going to take that as a no, and I will see you guys next Thursday. Have a good weekend.